When you're working in 3D in Photoshop, I think it's a good idea to switch to a workspace that's conducive to working in 3D. And there is a preset, a 3D workspace preset inside Photoshop that I think can get you started. But I want you to customize that, or at least I suggest you customize it. I'm going to change my workspace, and I'm going to have the same workspace throughout the entire process inside this course. So you might as well change yours to match mine, at least as long as we're working on this thing together. So to do that, let's go to Photoshop and start it up. It'll probably start in the Essentials workspace because that's the default workspace, but you might be working in something else. At any rate, I want to switch to 3D. So go up here to this drop-down list, click on that, and click on 3D. So what's the big difference? Well, it just opens up a 3D panel down here. The thing is, though, when you work in 3D, you're going to work with 3 panels: the 3D panel, the Layers panel, and the Properties panel. So you really need to have all 3 of them open at once. And we're also going to work with history a lot, because in 3D, every time you move the camera, you add another line to history, and sometimes it's best just to go back a few steps just to get back to where you started from. So what I want to do is I want to put history and 3D together inside the same panel. So I'm going to take 3D here and drag it up to history right there and put it inside the same panel. And that would be enough for this point. But the thing is, when we work with a lot of documents here, the little document tabs sometimes get in the way when you open this up and you can't really see the tab here. So what I want to do here is take one panel and put it above this one just to kind of give us a little buffer there. So I'm going to take this little clone stamp source here and drag it up by clicking on this guy here and dragging it above there. So I get a little blue line and put it there. So that way you have the 3D panel slightly below the tabs here, which is where I want it. And now that I've set up this workspace, I think it's a good idea to save it as a customized workspace. The way you do that is by just clicking this little drop down here and going to New Workspace and giving it a name. I'm going to call it 3D SlingStack. You can call it whatever you want and click Save. And now we have this workspace. So now I want to open up a 3D object just to show you how this looks and also show you what might happen if you do it if you haven't set things up properly. So to do that, I want to make a new document. So go File, New. I want to change from the default Photoshop size or whatever you've got up here to one that we're going to use throughout this course. So I'm going to change the pixels by clicking over here, going to Pixels. That changes pixels for both. Let's change this to 1200 by 1200 and have it be 300 pixels per inch. Not important that we do this, but at least we're on the same page if we do this. And change the background contents to transparent. And that should work for us down the road. Once we set it up like this, it'll be the same every time we open up a new document, unless you open up some other kind of document in between. Nevertheless, this is what we're going to do for our standard document here. I'll leave it untitled. Just click OK. There we go. We have this new thing. I'll click on Layers to make sure the layer is open. We have an empty layer now. And you can create a 3D object from an empty layer, believe it or not. So let's go to the 3D panel here by clicking on this little box. And now I want to make a mesh from a preset. So I click on this radio button there. And cone is the top of the list. So cone is fine. We'll select cone. And now I'm going to click on create. But I'm going to get an error message. The error message says the 3D features require that you switch on the Use Graphics Processor switch inside the Preferences panel. So we haven't done that yet. We need to make sure that our graphics processor is enabled. So I click OK. Nothing's going to happen right now. And I need to go to Preferences. So to get the preferences, I go to Edit Preferences here in Windows or Photoshop Preferences on a Mac. Go over here, click on down there to Preferences. I'm going to open up the Performance section here. You can always get the performance if we click on the wrong one just by clicking here. Under Performance, there's a little checkbox here, Use Graphics Processor. So I'll click on that. And that would be enough, but I want to do one more thing inside Preferences. I want to go up to General. There's a little thing here called Use Shift Key for Tool Switch. That's on by default. And I want to switch amongst all the various move tools. When you're working with move inside 3D, there's all kinds of move tools in terms of how you can manipulate things. There's rotation and sliding around the X, Y, or sliding around in Z space. So there's all kinds of ways that you can go from one move tool to the next. And you just press the V key to do that. If the Shift key is switched on like this, you need to hold on Shift V to do it, which is kind of cumbersome. So I'm going to switch that off, and now I'm going to click OK. The thing is that graphics processing unit won't really take effect until we close Photoshop. I'll show you what I mean. I'll click on this create here, and I get the same message I got before. So I'll close this down now. There you go. And now let's reopen it again. So now it should take, and I'm going to go over here and make a new document by going File, New, and we're going to get the same preset we just made before, 1200 by 1200. So I click OK. This empty layer. Click on the mesh from preset there. And then click on Cone and click on Create. And then we get this little message here saying, you are about to create a 3D layer. Would you like to switch to the 3D workspace? Well, not really, because we've got our customized workspace open here now. So I'm going to click no. And now we're going to make a cone. There you go. Now, if you haven't seen 3D in Photoshop, this right away has got to kind of grab your attention. Look at that, a 3D thing from thin air right here inside Photoshop. I want to show you around this document panel here just because I want to show you how you can turn things on and off inside the workspace. Up here is called the secondary view. Right now it's set to top. You can change the view up here to something else. You also see this grid down here, the ground plane, that's on by default. This is the light here, the so-called infinite light that's now shining on this object, and it's on by default as well. And then if I click on the object, then I get this thing called a widget. And the widget is also on by default. But if you don't see these guys for some reason, you can switch them on by going to the View menu. So go View, Show. And these are the four things that we're looking at. The secondary view in the upper left-hand corner, the ground plane, that grid, the lights, and the selection. That's the widget. If I turn that off, the widget goes away. I can click on this, and I can actually move it around. Let's try that now. There we go. Move it around like that. But I don't have that lovely little widget to help me out. So I'm going to switch that back on by going View, Show, and 3D selection. So when I click on it, there is our widget again. So there you go. That's the basic way I think you should set up your 3D workspace with the two panels up here, the 3D and history together, plus property and layers over here. The four views I just told you about, plus the keyboard shortcut. When I press on V, watch what happens up here. I go 1, 2, 3. I can go amongst all these 5 things here just by pressing V without having to hold down the Shift key. So there you go. That's our recommended 3D workspace.